Welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. That was my best Scott Barker impression. But I'm Sam, I'm a content producer here at Outreach. And today's topic is about ramping SDRs quickly, effectively. We'll be talking about how to use interactive training and support them through the entire onboarding process. Not just fire hosing them with tons of information on week one, expecting them to be able to recall it and use it. So fortunately for all of you, I am joined by three incredible SDR managers who have been there and done that. They are absolute experts. They're so much fun. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to hand it over to them in just a moment. But first, just some quick housekeeping while people are still piling in. We want this to be super interactive. Like our guests said, they love questions in the chat. So go ahead, turn on your chat if you haven't already. We're going to use the Q&A actually. If you drop your questions, I would love it if you do it in the Q&A box. So as you think of questions, drop them in there. We'll pull them in as it makes sense. And we'll also leave some room at the end for Q&A. So go ahead, break the ice. Let us introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our fabulous guests, our panel of experts. Molly, let's start with you to just give us an introduction about you, where you're coming from, and then we'll pass the potato.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Molly Grossman. I manage the sales development team here at Outreach for our EMEA region. Specifically, I oversee the segment of what we call emerging. So basically all our new hires. So in an SDR's kind of lifespan for the first 6 months, rough estimation, they'll be on the emerging team, which means I have the honor of watching an SDR go from having not a clue how to do anything, which is exactly where they should be, all the way to when we can promote them up into the upper segments where they can really solidify their career development. I've been at Outreach. I was one of the first SDRs for our EMEA region. I joined back in 2019. So I've been an Outreach SDR. I'm now an Outreach manager. So yeah, I really got to drink my own champagne is a phrase we have in the UK. Oh, and as if you couldn't tell, I'm from England, currently in London. And I will pass it over.
Champagne sounds better than Kool-Aid.
I know, we've just taken it up a notch. We've made it more European.
It's probably because you guys are ahead in time.
Yeah, we don't drink. I didn't know what Kool-Aid was for such a long time when I was like in the US, and I still
have you had it? Have you ever had Kool-Aid, Molly?
No, I've never had Kool-Aid. But I've had champagne, so I think I've picked the better out of the two.
1000%. Don't bother. That might be the hottest opinion of today.
Okay, so Sam,
Thank you so much. Yes.
Send me some Kool-Aid, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, absolutely. All right. Go on then, Sam, take it away.
Well, thanks, Molly. I also agree champagne is much better than Kool-Aid. I am our sales development manager here at PostClick. I joined here back in January to really grow and scale up our SDR org, where we went from 3 SDRs in January to 13 today. I lead all of our functions, and that includes both an inbound dedicated function as well as an outbound enterprise function. My specialties and focus have really been on building and scaling SDR orgs. I've gone 3 to 13 most recently. I've done 4 to 12, 10 to 30. I love just really taking really talented folks, no matter their background, and putting them into this wonderful, incredible world of sales and just setting them up for success. So I'm really excited to, join Molly and Patrick and Sales Hacker, and hopefully, sincerely, please ask as many questions as you can, because this is about you and helping you scale up your sales development functions. Patrick, Molly, we all know how to do this. So let us be a resource for you all. And on that note, Patrick, you want to show off for a couple minutes?
I appreciate the introduction. Absolutely, I agree. Questions are paramount. I mean, for us to, or for you guys to get the most out of this, please ask the questions that you find particularly relevant when it comes to effectively scaling an SDR team. I'm Patrick Connolly. I'm leading sales development efforts for North America for Cognizant. Been doing this for a number of years, growing SDR teams. I think for me, the SDR management passion came from, anytime that somebody started new at any company. I could have been inbound, I was outbound when I was team leader, even before any of this. One of the passions for me was like, oh, a new person started, I really want to help them feel welcome. And I want to be able to show them, the sequences that we're using and how much fun that this job can be. And it was always a passion of mine. And I think that when I first started out as an SDR, I didn't really have management as something that was tabbed. It just kind of came to me based on some of these passions. So I'm really excited to talk about effectively ramping SDR teams. And again, I think the questions governing this conversation, we have topics. We're actually not that prepared. We have topics that we're looking to speak through, but I think the questions for you guys. And then I'm coming from Boston. So thank you guys all for being here. Really excited.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited. I think it would be really cool to just start the conversation off with the problem that we're solving for. So what are some of the challenges that SDR managers are facing when onboarding new reps? Maybe broadly, what are they doing wrong? We could go in the same order as last time. Molly, would you be interested to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So if I understood the question is what's the biggest mistake that someone can make or does make?
Yeah.
I would say the biggest mistake that someone can make, I think it starts from like the idea of what an SDR function does. Probably, I would view it quite holistically. So if you're going into this thinking that your SDRs are there to book meetings and are there to just hammer phones and are essentially a very well paid call center, then I think it's going to be quite an uphill battle. Whereas I think that those leaders that see the SDR org as pipeline and opportunity generators, which sounds like a very small shift, but it's a mental shift. It trickles down, it's top down, and it's going to bleed into the culture and kind of the standard and how you're setting your team up for success. So I think that small but really important kind of language is something that when I'm speaking to SDR managers, we see, it's kind of like, do they value the SDR team? Do they get how important and how integral the role is? Do they get that these SDRs are bringing in opportunities literally from thin air? And I manage both an inbound and an outbound SDR team, but the grit that's needed to get an opportunity from nowhere, to strike up a conversation normally with an absolute stranger. And not only that, but they are an amazing pool of talent for then the rest of that company to take from. I think is sometimes taken for granted, and you see that in like high turnover rates, and that can really make or break someone's career. If they have a bad experience as an SDR because they weren't valued. It might sound a bit holistic, but it can impact someone, and you've got them right. Often you've got them right at the beginning of their sales career. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
I love that. Sam, Patrick, is there anything that you would add there? Agree or disagree?
I'll start off with just agreeing with anything
Same
Molly
way.
has said so far, as well as anything she'll say in the future. So just listen to her, right? I want to add a nuance, and it's actually a perspective I learned not from sales leaders, but actually from engineering leaders. And there's this classic tug that I think Molly was talking about is like, you should start when you're hiring at your SDR org. What's the purpose of this organization? Is it to generate pipeline? Is it to set meetings? Is it to create a talent funnel into other parts of our org, right? And so as you're asking yourselves those questions, something I learned from engineers actually was that a lot of organizations, engineers don't even touch the code base for a while. And even when they do, they're not expected to be at full capacity, a full producing engineer for only between 6 to 12 months. And by no means am I recommending you prevent your SDR from cold calling or sending emails until they've hit the 6-month mark. That is not my recommendation at all. That it would have to be a very niche organization that would require that. But I think a lot the biggest mistake a lot of orgs make is, hey, we need to get more pipeline and more meetings. Let's hire a bunch of SDRs and have them do it. And they don't create the scalable functions for the SDR team to be successful. Where it's, hey, cool, you got a week of training, you got a phone, here's our database, go make some calls. Even if the SDR finds success and sets pipeline immediately, they're going to burn out so quickly because you're not setting up for long-term success. They're going to end up losing that really amazing talent that you've hired to another competing organization. So I think a mistake that a lot of people make when they're really starting out these functions is not even asking, why are we doing this and how are we going to set up for success for the long-term future of this roles function?
That's awesome.
I have a
Go
question,
ahead.
Sam, off the back of that.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you were saying all those 3 things that you need to think about. Can I just say, as a side note, I'm loving how much this Kool-Aid conversation is like blowing up in the chat box. I'm like, I saw some like an awful macabre like reference to some massacre at one point. It's gone away from that now, but that's just a side note. So Sam, do you think it can be all? Do you think you can, when you're building out your SDR team and you're talking about the talent pool, you're talking about the pipeline opportunities, and then you said meetings separately, do you think those are separate things, or do you think you can accomplish all 3 things?
You should. I think to help the SDR org should do all of those and more. Because the missing piece that I also talked about is the culture of the org, and we'll talk about it later. I think there's a really good question about characteristics to hire for, is that a lot of people look at SDRs largely as like the meeting setters and assistants, and they don't even take into consideration that like look at Molly. She started at Outreach a few years ago and is now leading their EMEA function. Like, talk about an impact of an entire organization. Like, Molly, how big is your headcount right now?
I've got 15 XDRs and 1 team lead under me.
Right. So there's
and our whole SDR function is 26 SDRs.
Right. So you got 16 people that you directly manage and another 10 that like you influence daily. And imagine if you had a salty experience when you were first starting out at Outreach. How could that have toxic culture influence not only you, but everyone else you touched at the org? And so, to answer your question, it's all one cute little package. And if you're not thinking about all those things, then like just outsource SDRs. It's going to be cheaper and it's going to do what you need it to do. Patrick?
Is it over to me for the same question? I think you guys already highlighted it, right? I think understanding the purpose of why for an SDR, right? But also like, do you have the right accounts identified? Are you targeting the right people? Do you have an understanding of your customers, like the pain points, right? Like if you don't have that, like table stakes, like it doesn't make sense to even have anybody pick up the phones, because even to your point, even if they luck into a meeting, if you don't have like your sales process outlined and like that operational piece, like that's such a missing piece. And then like, just from like to bring it back to this topic specifically, effectively ramping SDRs, biggest 2 mistakes, single-threaded learning and keeping them off the phones. The sooner you get them on the phones, the more that they're going to get out of the training. Because here's the thing, think about it this way. You do like a competitor training, in-depth competitor training, and you just talk at them for, an hour or so, versus you put them on the phones, they hear about some of your competitors, they get shut down, and then they go to like an interactive learning course about how to sell against your competitors. You bet that they're going to be listening to that versus only retaining about 10% of the stuff that you said. And that comes back to that single-threaded learning. If I sit there with my new hires and I talk at them for 10 hours, like I could know everything. And so I don't, but I could literally know every single thing about this, about the motion, about the customers, about the pain points, every single thing that you would ever need to know. And I could tell them and I could be like, nice, I nailed that. And you know what? I didn't, because they didn't retain any of it, because they're still like, wait, what did he mean by MQL? Or like literally. So I think, having a lot of different pieces, right? So like you come in your first day, you have, a lot of different pieces thrown at you, right? Maybe you read something, maybe you listen to something, maybe you take a quiz on something, you meet a couple people, you do a shadow, you do a role play. It's really important to switch up those types of learnings and putting them on the phones early. But I couldn't agree more with what Sam and Molly are saying. Is like, have a reason to go to market with an SDR team. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Just putting people on the phones and expecting things to work out. It often doesn't.
Patrick,
I know that there's some questions. I just saw one pop up. It said for Patrick. I can address that, or if we want to take it from the top. I don't know how these things.
Yeah, I want
I
to
don't
dig
know how
more
these things typically
into
work.
the training and coaching piece of it. But before we get there, I want to talk about hiring a little bit and who you should be bringing into these roles in the first place. And then we'll kind of jump into like week one and the onboarding schedule. So who should you be bringing onto your SDR team? I know we've got some controversy here. Is it second jobbers? Is it green candidates? I think Sam looks like he wants to start this one, but
Yeah, so I have a hot take, and
Controversy.
I'll do a little asterisk after my hot take, so understand I am a giant hypocrite for saying this. I do not believe if you are hiring SDRs, you should hire someone with previous sales experience. Molly, you want to clear your throat?
Yeah, we we stand on very different grounds, but I'll let you explain the reason why behind that opinion.
Yeah, the asterisk that I'm going to attach to that really hot take is one of my top performers on my org was a previous SDR before we hired him here at PostClick. So there's a giant asterisk to that statement. But the question that goes through my mind when I'm interviewing someone for an SDR role today, and they have SDR experience at another organization, the first question that goes through my mind is, why are you still an SDR? Because in my mind, if you are such an exceptional seller that you're coming to me saying, Sam, I want to be an SDR again for you. If you're such an incredible seller, why are you still an SDR at your organization? That's what goes through my mind.
Sam, I'm gonna ask a question.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of experience building out SDR teams. Do you also have a lot of experience looking at and possibly even trying to help companies that haven't built out SDR teams well?
Yeah.
And do you see a lot of SDRs failing? And you're probably thinking they don't deserve to be failing. And if they were under different management, they would do really well.
All the time. It happens.
Hold him down back. He's like, would you just finish your sentence so I can come back at you? It seems like holding in you.
I was holding it in. I held it in for long, Patrick.
That top SDR, sure, I'll name him. He might even be on the call. His name's Alec. You can all look him up. He's incredible. He was at an amazing startup before he got here, and they just couldn't get their funding going, and they folded. And so I poached him up and I grabbed him because he has the sales DNA built into his body, and he just got this product didn't have product market fit, or they're too early to market. And so none of his fault whatsoever. He is exceptional at what he does, and that is not a reflection of him whatsoever.
There's a lot of good comments about this topic. I think it depends sometimes too how you're structured, right? Or like if you have previous SDR experience, a lot of people in the chat are saying, yeah, well, they wouldn't have previous SDR experience, but some people are saying, well, hey, what if, that person had a bad boss, or they were underpaid, or there was other, right? There's a lot of other pieces to that puzzle. I agree with Sam. It's like, all right, well, like if you're this great SDR, like, why are you moving? And if they have like sound reasoning, but also here's the SDR that I want. I want the SDR who LinkedIn messages me and goes, hey, Pat, I see you're hiring for SDRs. These are the 3 things you're looking for. And here's why I'm the person. You have 15 minutes next week to discuss this. Like, I want people working me as if they're SDRs for my time to interview them. At the end of the day, an interview process is a sales process. I think we can agree with that. So getting that person, say that person comes to me and says, can I get 15 minutes of your time? I'm like, yeah, no worries. We'll get you that offer in the next 15, right? I mean, that's the person that you want. Like, if you're going to be a former SDR, you better be that exceptional former SDR. And like, I get it. Some people, but also to Molly's point, right? Like, say you have an enterprise segment and you really only want somebody with, a year of experience. And maybe you specifically maybe you go after in your hiring method, maybe you look at companies in your space that have poor Glassdoor reviews, right? And you say, like, I'm going to go see if I can poach a couple of those SDRs. Maybe you do that, right? That's a much different story of pulling those people in than getting somebody that applies and sort of having the same demeanor as somebody coming out of college. Like, they have to be that exceptional talent to get that offer, because I've had the people that come in and they're I think Sam's, there was a Sam in the Q&A. I'm sorry, I don't know the last name, but was like, maybe they're entrenched in bad habits, right? I've had that person that comes in. You don't want the know-it-all. You want somebody that's curious and open-minded, but you also don't want to necessarily silo yourself and say, no, I'm never going to entertain the possibility. And especially if you're hiring for these enterprise segments that have sold into other verticals before, or at least have had cold call experience. But I also agree with Sam. It's like, hey, if you're this exceptional SDR, like you better have a good reason for coming over, or there must be something going on over there. But you have to be that next level. I think you can't really measure that interview against a traditional kid out of college. Would be my rebuttal.
Absolutely. We got a good question that kind of transitions us into the coaching piece. So you've hired the great candidate. One of the questions we got from David was, how would you guys recommend approaching the setup of a brand new SDR function when you don't have any internal SDR expertise? Would one of you like to take a stab at that one? How would you recommend approaching?
How do you recommend approaching the setup of a brand new SDR function when you don't have any internal? Interesting.
I can handle that because I consulted for dozens of companies that did that. Unless Molly, Patrick, you all want to jump in first?
No, this sounds like
Please,
yeah,
Well,
it's your experience.
Don't do it. If you do not know how to do it, don't do it. Hire someone, either hire a consultant. There's amazing sales hacker partners with so many amazing consultants. Hire an organization that specializes in this. Hire an SDR leader. There are so many talented SDR leaders who want the chance to become millionaires and aren't given the chance at their organization because they don't have significant equity. So if you find that talent and you go to them and say, hey, look, I need you. I can't offer you a sexy management role. I can't offer you a giant base. And I'm going to need you to pick up the phones for a bit. But I'm going to give you a ton of equity in the company. And I'm going to make you like basically one of the co-founders of this organization because you're scaling up this function for me. And all I'm going to ask you to do is to wear a hat for 6 months and have someone who's an expert at it do it. Because if you're not an expert at sales development and you're trying to build it out, you're going to fail. And I have consulted with a bunch of companies that thought they were experts and were not, and then they failed. And I've consulted with a bunch of companies that tried to do it themselves, failed, and then came to me and then got help on doing it the second time. So don't be a statistic. Don't try and prove, well, I've fixed every other business unit here, so I can fix this one. It's such a niche, such an emerging market. I don't know about Pat or Molly, but all the things I did as an SDR 5 years ago, I no longer do today because it's changed that much. So the last time you sold or generating outbound meetings was 2 decades ago in the .com boom. There's no way in hell that you know what you're doing. And if you just try and hire someone and be like, here's a playbook, go for it, you're going to make a mistake. So hire talent or get a consultant because you're going to mess it up.
I completely agree. I agree. Like take it seriously. Like don't be so, I don't want to use the word arrogant or ignorant, but like, don't like give the sales development space the credit that it deserves in the intricacies. Like I agree with Sam on the fact that he said, and it's true, like what my SDR team, I stopped SDRing like a year, like not that long ago, essentially. And even now when I'm like jumping in with my team, like, oh, sure, like I'll get on the phones with my team or I'll start prospecting with my team, like as like a spiff, I'm like, hi, can you just like teach me about this new thing that you guys are doing? Because it moves so fast. And I'm like, tell me about video prospecting. Tell me about voice notes on LinkedIn. I didn't know you could do that. Like there I am downloading it onto my phone. Like, yeah, you got to be willing to admit and willing to be taught about the space. So I agree with Sam.
So let's take it as if that person doesn't have the ability to hire a consultant or hire this person themselves. I think that should be the first thing is look at some of the immensely talented SDR leaders out there. I think a lot can come from just like asking people for their time. I remember when I was first an SDR manager, I literally just crafted a LinkedIn message and I sent it to your Sam Nelson's and I forget exactly who ran the HubSpot SDR team at the time, but there was a bunch of companies that I knew that I admired. And I was like, I literally was like, hey, I'm Patrick. I'm about to be the brand new SDR manager. and I have no idea what I'm doing. Could I like grab a couple minutes of your time and you could walk me through? And from just like, I remember my conversation with Sam and my conversation with, you know, a number of these people, was like, I would learn different tenets of the SDR motion. And I think just like, you know, table stake stuff, again, you need to understand your accounts, the contacts that you want to go after at those accounts, the pain points of those individuals. You need to have like those sequences set up. And then to what we're talking about today is you have to have a system that you can place those people in that they can be successful. I don't think it's necessary. Like, I agree. This is not the first idea. Like, if you can, I think you explore some of the people that have done it before. I think there's no substitute for experience. But if you can't, I mean, there are ways around it to learn. I mean, you know, reading books and following LinkedIn influencers and all of these things, even though they're sort of like, of course he would say that. Well, there's a reason that people still do all of those things, right? So that can be very beneficial as well.
And there's
but good luck.
Good luck. And then also there's a shit ton of free resources like Sales Hacker has so many SDR leaders posting. There's amazing forums on Sales Hacker where like I've seen a bunch of those amazing development leaders literally just answering questions from VPs of sales or CEOs for building out functions.
Yep.
I won't speak for Patrick or Molly. Their time is incredibly valuable. But like if someone like reached out to me and said, hey, Sam, do you have 30 minutes so I can ask you about how to build an SDR function? I would, of course, give any founder 30 minutes to help them out. Like I'd
be flattered. I'd be like, oh, yeah, of course. That's so cool.
Yeah, like I'm on the backs of giants of all of the people I've asked for help when I was in that space. So like, don't be and like Molly term, like I'll call it out, like don't be an arrogant like egomaniac to think you can do it by yourself. Like ask people who are doing it right now to help you, and we'll probably help you because guess what? We were helped too not that long ago. So we're subject matter experts. Leverage us. A lot of us do it for free.
Great question asked by the group. I wonder if there are other questions or other topics to explore.
Yeah, I love this. So I think there's one more good relevant question here in the chat before we jump into the tech stack, because I know we've got a lot to cover there and I want to make sure we get into that. But how do you strike the balance of challenging your SDRs and also interweaving empathy into your approach? Was a question in the chat from Josh. I thought that might be a nice one to end on and move us into the next section. How do you
system balance between
it's the balance between challenging your SDRs but also interweaving empathy into your approach?
I can go unless Molly, Patrick, you all want to start off.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'll actually start with all the questions. And an introduction. When I was a little boy and when I wanted to grow up, I wanted to be a space lawyer. Huh?
All the way back to the beginning.
Oh,
tell us your life story, Sam.
Pat, born and raised in Sacramento in 19 blah 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 blah. But I'm gonna get there. Give me a second. When I was a little boy, I wanted to be a space lawyer. I want to be the guy that decided who owns the moon, who decides what owns property in Mars. And I'm right now presenting on sales development leadership skills. Pat, when you were a little boy, what did you want to be?
An NBA basketball player.
I'm guessing you're probably vertically challenged enough to not be a pro ball player.
Oh, you know, it's been a while since I've dunked on my 6-foot hoop in my parents' backyard, but you know, never say never. Yeah, waiting on the call for the Knicks.
Molly, what about you when you were a little girl?
I wanted to be Britney Spears. Don't question it. Don't think about the logistics. I just wanted to be her. I was her. That was it.
I'm seeing two amazing human beings across from me. Pat, you're not in the NBA. I'm not a space lawyer. Molly, I'll say this. I've never seen you and Britney Spears in the same room.
You've never seen us in the same room at the same time.
You can't say it hasn't happened.
You can't say it hasn't happened.
I'm not saying
Free Britney. Yes, Jill. Hashtag.
Hashtag Free Britney. Check that out. That's an amazing documentary. Nothing to do with what we're talking about. But the reason why I'm really poking fun at all three of us, and I would ask if you're in the chat to ask yourself that question, because I can guarantee you none of the SDRs on your team or that you're hiring when they were 10 or 11 said, I want to be an SDR for a tech company one day. I did this for my entire sales organization. I had one person out of our 45 sales org when they were 10 years old want to be a salesperson. And yet, for some reason, we're all here. And so when I think back to that question that you asked, of like, how do you balance like the needs of the job versus building empathy? I love to start with the why. Why is this person here? Are they here for financial success? Are they here for growth opportunities? Are they here for X, Y, and Z? Because once you understand that why of why they're here, it's so easy to tie the hard parts of this job to the empathy portion. Because guess what? Cold calling sucks. But if you want to have financial success because you're the first person in your family to ever graduate from college, and the way to have financial success is to make more than 6 figures a year, you're never going to get to that stage unless you make the cold calls today. And that's when cold calling becomes fun. So I like to answer that question of like, how do I balance that by asking my SDRs what they want to be when they grew up? Because the answer is almost never sales. Then I ask them, why are they in sales today then? And that gets me to where I need to be. I don't know how Pat, you and Molly do it, but Molly, you want to jump in?
I found this really actually quite difficult when I first became a manager, because I'll be honest, I'm quite a direct person. Sam, you've all probably seen it. I'm quite a direct person. And when I first became a manager, I did find it really difficult to almost stop for a second and be a bit more empathetic. And what actually helped me was, and this might not be the case, but I had this view that to be a really good manager and to have a team that listened to what you do and work and, you know, have that grit and that determination to hit their goals, that you almost had to crack the whip and there had to be this separation between you and them. And through kind of apathy, that was where that kind of relationship, and that's how it should work. Which is weird because no one at Outreach has ever treated me like that, but that's how I viewed it. And I read a book. When Patrick was saying about the resources, I love reading books. So I've read a ton of sales management books, and one of them was called The Trust Triangle. And essentially, if you trust your SDRs and you get to the point where you are, you trust each other and you know each other on a human level, then the results are going to come, because similar to what Sam said, kind of Simon Sinek, start with why. If you understand why they're doing what they're doing and they understand why you're doing what you're doing, you're both going to have, sorry, not trash triangle, trust. It's a very thick London accent. Trust triangle. And it was fantastic. And it was basically like, get to know your team. And that's how you're going to be more empathetic. Because I'm empathetic with my friends. I'm empathetic with the people I love. And now, you know, since reading that book and since taking that different mindset of like, start with the why, understand it, and then you won't have to ask, it won't be a conscious thing anymore. Patrick?
I love these answers.
It just comes back to
Patrick go.
Well, it just comes back to knowing your people. Like, do you care about them on like a human level more than just like a number on a spreadsheet, right? Like, do you know what motivates them? Do you know what they're trying to do, their career aspirations, their personal aspirations, right? I think a lot of that comes down. For those of you, I think one of the hardest things to do is transitioning from an SDR or like a team lead tool manager. Like, hey, you were friends with them, but now you're their boss. I remember the first time I was manager, I called everybody into the room that I was about to. They were my buddies, really, right? Like, they were my SDRs. We were on the floor together, and it was the first time I was ever going to go into management. And I asked them, I was like, hey, I'm getting this job offer. Like, these are the 3 things that I'm going to do, and this is why it's going to make your life better. Like, I understand what you guys are going through. If you don't want me to accept it, though, if this is weird, I won't. And I remember just like overwhelming like appreciation and support from my guys. And that was a big push for me to go into management. Was I was just like, all right, if I have my people's back, then they're going to work hard for me. And so I never really, I haven't towed that line, because I think if you're approaching that line and you're worrying, like, am I being too hard on them? It's taking a step back, to Molly's point, and being like, let me make sure I really know what motivates them. And then to Sam's point, it's like, how do I tie what they care about to why it's important to work hard? And if you can do that, and you can help them understand that working hard and achieving the business targets that are required is going to help them in their aspirations. That's the sweet spot. That's the balance.
I love this. Understanding where people are coming from, building a relationship, trusting them, having their back. I love this. So I want to switch a little bit to talking about how to set them up successfully with the best tools in their tool stack. And we've gotten some questions even in the chat about that. I want to start out though, because Sam shared a pretty controversial statement yesterday, which was that he doesn't believe in tech stacks. So I'll start there, but then we can get into some of the specific questions about the tech stack.
Sam.
This is gonna be so much fun as Molly's drinking from her beautiful Outreach mug. Shout out Outreach. Outreach is amazing. We use it here as I'm about to decry every single tool. Sam, can I use a prop to demonstrate my point?
Absolutely.
Does anyone recognize, oh, you can't really see it. Does anyone recognize what, I'm gonna turn off my background. Recognize what this is?
It's a hammer.
Is it a hammer?
It's a hammer. Oh my God, it's a hammer. Okay. What are a hammer? Thank you, Liz. What are the two main ways to use a hammer?
I've never picked up a hammer in my life.
Oh, Molly, we are gonna do like home improvement London, and when you move next, I'm gonna come out. I'm gonna bring champagne and Kool-Aid, and we're gonna have
Sam, get back to the hammer metaphor.
I can use a hammer like this to hammer in a nail. Use a hammer like this to pull out the nail, right? But why can't I use a hammer like this? Why can't I use a hammer like this? Why can't I use a hammer like this? Right? Think about it. This is such a simple tool that even though Molly's used it, she can recognize it. Look how simple of a tool this is. And I can use this incorrectly so many different ways. And now think about all the amazing tools that we're going to be talking about very shortly, like Cognism and Outreach. Definitely check both of those out afterwards. And think about how complex those tools are. And they're not a hammer. And I could spend 30 minutes talking to you about how I could incorrectly use a hammer. Well, I could spend an entire year showing you how to incorrectly use Outreach and Cognism. And I think a mistake a lot of organizations make is they spend so much time focusing on the tools. And Pat, Molly, I'll ask you this question, but it's a rhetorical one, because like a majority of the customers that churn from post-click are customers that use our tools incorrectly, right? And so when I think about selling, I want to first focus on, do we have the selling fundamentals down? Because if we start layering tools on top of how to sell incorrectly, then guess what's going to happen? Then we're going to use the hammer like this and like a rowing function, and then we're not going to hammer anything else. So
better when you say the hot take, and then we can go back and forth before you explain and actually make a lot of sense. Basically, what you're saying is you're saying it's not necessarily you're against the tech stack. You're basically saying that if you spend all of your time teaching your team how to use Outreach or Cognism, and you don't actually teach them the fundamentals and the challenges, so like they could be like experts in sequencing and using the contact data, but then they get on the phone, they go, oh no, I don't really know about your challenges or the value props that I'm supposed to, right? You're basically saying that companies are spending far too much time trying to get people into their tools, but not showing them how to use the tools to supplement what is actually the job. Your job isn't to be a tools expert, but it's sort of getting to that, right? Is that?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's more eloquently put than what I said. So like, don't listen to me, listen.
No, you stop that. You're bringing the controversial topic. I see your side of it.
Molly, what you got?
You know, when you say it like that, I get it. But for me, like listening to that, and I completely agree. It's the most painful thing ever. Like, and I'm always, like you said before, I always have people reach out who are customers of Outreach or not customers of Outreach, and they say, I want to talk to you about, you know, how we use it, whatever. And I completely agree. If you're not set up correctly, it can be really, it's a tragedy to not sound too dramatic when tools aren't used correctly, because you need to be enabled, right? But tools, and yes, I'm going to talk about Outreach. It's not because I work for Outreach. It can be any sales engagement platform or any enablement platform. These platforms are there to ensure that when you are onboarding your team, you're onboarding them with the best practices, right? So the reason why I know how to teach my SDRs what value propositions are appealing to our sales leaders is because I rely on the data and analytics from my tools, right? So don't get me wrong, if I was, you know, trying to teach them, am I trying to teach them from a gut? Obviously, this question depends on, have you got any SDRs? Are you starting from scratch? It depends on so many things. But, you know, I rely heavily on data and those reporting, and, you know, all this is great. Oh, you know, Sam, I'm going to teach my team how to be amazing on the phone. Oh, wait, I have no numbers. They can't get through to anyone. And you said yourself, I'm getting excited, but you said yourself that you need to fail fast, right? You need to get on the phone and you need to get over it. You need to bite the bullet. You need to crash and burn. How are they going to do that if they're not set up, right? And that's where a lovely tool like Cognism comes in.
With the right tools.
With the right tools.
So the other thing too, and I think that connecting back, I don't want to cut you off, connecting back to like this webinar, how to ramp and effectively onboard SDRs. I think there's also a tool stack that's outside of your traditional like SDR or maybe some overlap. But, I think one of the most important things is having, a place where they can go to be assigned like a course, right? So you think about like content syndication platforms like your Showpads, your iSpots, your Legos. We use something called How Now, but a place where you can assign them and be like, hey, instead of me spending all of my time, that's the other piece too. Part of scaling this SDR team effectively is making sure that you don't spend too much time doing things repetitively every single month. Like what can potentially be recorded and transcribed into a video? What are some really important skills, like defining the important skills, maybe having a quiz, but being able to assign all of that in a learning platform. And then I think something like that can allow your reps to listen to cold calls or listen to demos. So I can think about like Gong, okay, well, if you're going to have Gong, don't just have Gong and don't just teach people how to use Gong. Have a library of 50 calls that are assigned in your first 2 weeks that the SDRs are expected to listen to. And you'd be amazed at how much little you have to do by putting in that work to create that library and that ecosystem to allow these reps to be successful from day one. So I think the tech stack for learning, while there is some overlap, it's actually a bit different than what makes an SDR successful, like to go to market with, versus whereas you would use Cognism, outreach, and tools like that. Whereas with the learning piece, and that's what this webinar is specifically for, I think being able to have that course created with that multi-threaded ecosystem of different, again, videos, calls, listening, your role plays, your call blocks, you have that in there too. But there are tech stacks that allow for this ramping to be much smoother and much more effective and timely.
I just want to plus one something you said really quick, Pat, and that's around learning, and it's a really cool term I've learned.
Agree with me?
Yeah, just this once.
I think I do a victory lap.
It's this idea of asynchronous learning, right? And we use Loom for that all the time. Like I was jamming away last night doing some new inbound processes for my team. And I'm like, I don't want to call these guys at like 6 or 7 at night. What am I going to do? I'm going to just record myself doing this process and I'm going to drop it in a specific Slack channel. And then boom. One, I love it. I get to track. Sorry, I don't know if they're on this. They might be. I get to track whether or not they watch the video, right? Because you can always go back and be like, hey, do you watch the video? Do you do the training I told you to do? You can test them on it, but then you're like, okay, well, how much time am I spending testing it? Or I can just go to the video itself and see, oh, so-and-so watched the video. Great. Now I can know to test them on it. And if they haven't watched the video, hey, make sure you watch that video. And so the value of asynchronous learning, and like what Pat said, is like he has time to like go ahead and like curate this like library of Gong, so he doesn't sit there and like do 50 sales calls on his own with the team. And so you really want to think about, okay, how can your voice or your drive or your goal be shared with the team without you being present? I think that's going to be super crucial as you're scaling it up. So honestly, if you're thinking about hiring SDRs, document the shit out of everything you do right now. Over document, over record, always have record on. And then that's just like this treasure trove of information. And if you have the time, it takes
always have record on.
Yeah, always have record on.
Like you may think it's just something that you're just like walking through, like, oh yeah, I was thinking about like LinkedIn Sales Navigator the other day, and I was shy, hey, well, did you ever notice that you can, create alerts and you can ping these accounts to the top and you can see job changes and this stuff, and then it's like, oh wait, if I had that recorded, I could have just sent that over instead of teaching them Sales Nav for 30 minutes every single month that I'm making hires. Document everything. Nice, Sam.
I love that. Loom is a lifesaver.
Put it in the suggestion box.
All right. Well, I want to switch over to talking about targets and setting targets, hitting targets. Let's start with, setting the targets, how you view doing that. Should the bar be high? Should it be, a minimum stabbing point? I think it'd be interesting to start with Molly on this one. based off of some of the comments in our prep call. What would you say to this, Molly?
I think it goes back to like this idea of the culture that I spoke about at the beginning. Mindset's really important in a job where the reality is the majority of their day, of an SDR's day, is spent facing rejection. When we first came to EMEA, we intentionally had our SDR targets set low. We would have rather that they would be overachieved and over exceeded rather than they fall short. Honestly, I personally don't understand it. If someone could explain it to me, that would be great. But I don't understand when companies have SDRs who are constantly missing their quota, because you've got to look at it, right? It's either one of two things. It's one, the quota is too high, or two, you know, the SDR it has a gap in their learning and they need coaching. But when it's a pattern and it's clear that it's a whole team, you know, quotas should be a minimum. Quotas should be a minimum expectation to be hit. From a management perspective, also, that just is going to help you with your forecasting, rather than it being, well, our team is quoted at XYZ, and they're told that's what their OTE is, but actually they never reach that because that quota is really high. That just creates disillusionment with the SDR, doesn't really make them feel valued. They're not going to get job satisfaction because they're not hitting their quotas. I'm not saying make quotas easy to hit. What I'm saying is that quotas should be a minimum hit. So, and that should be the mentality that you always tell the SDRs. It should be hard to hit, don't get me wrong. It should not be happening, you know, 2 weeks into the month. It should be difficult. But I think when you step back and if your whole team is missing quota, and it's kind of just been accepted as the norm, I think something needs to change, personally.
Yes, triple underline every word you said. That can, like, Sam, can you just like snippet that out, and that can be like a forever answer to how to set quota, because that's going to be more eloquently put than what I'm about to say. But I have two really interesting things to say, just adding on to Molly. One, if you set the SDR quota a little bit lower, yeah, you might overcompensate your SDRs, but like look at an organization like Outreach. They just got 200 million in the bank in an amazing, sexy fundraising round. Congratulations. Like paying an SDR a few $100 extra to give them that confidence to be successful is a drop in the bucket. And maybe you don't have 200 million in the bank, but like still, would you rather have someone be overly successful and confident, or under successful and looking for a new job elsewhere? Like that's the kind of thought process you should be thinking through. And oh God, my SDRs are on this chat. Oh, well, they can know. We experimented with quota setting at PostClick. Sorry, team, y'all are going to hear this. Guess what? You're experimented on. Last quarter, we intentionally set quotas a little bit higher than we could have to see what would have happened. And we actually saw lower success. This quarter, we intentionally set quotas a little bit lower than we thought was reasonable. And you know what's really interesting? They are overachieving this quarter on last quarter's quota. And the quota is set lower this quarter, right? We reduced the quota from last quarter to this quarter, and they are overproducing this quarter than what they were doing the previous quarter's quota. Think about that. We lowered the goals and they're overproducing. And so like, I hope that's like a really good, if you're like, okay, well, you know, I want to nickel and dime my sales org. And I'm like, what the hell, what's wrong with you? But assuming you still don't believe you shouldn't nickel and dime your sales org, like use post-click SDRs as an example, use Molly's amazing snippet as an example. Like when you set quotas lower, you see overperformance over the targets you actually need. It's a really cool psychological effect. I'm not an expert in it, but like it works.
I don't really have much to add. I think that there's also the viewpoint of like higher level leadership, where you know you want to look at like how many demos do you need, and what's your conversion rate to opportunity, and what's your opportunity, like what's your win rate, and then sort of doing that back math of like, okay, well, this is the revenue that the business requires for this quarter, and whether those quotas. So I think like KPIs and quotas are a bit different, admittedly, because for me, quotas are determined by what the business requires, and the KPIs are like, what are the actions that someone needs to take to get there. So I think it's a lot of looking into like the data and another piece of that tech stack puzzle, right? Like you have Salesforce, having the ability to look into like, what are those conversion numbers looking like? And then a lot of the time, that's how you determine headcount too, is doing the back math from that revenue. It comes back to Sam's point, like, what is the reason you're having these SDRs? Is it just so you have this overpaid call center, or is it to develop real pipeline, or is it to get to your business targets that you need from a revenue perspective? I think sometimes, and there was a question that was asked about like, how like the SDRs sometimes don't feel part of the business, right? Like, I think if you can help them understand how critical they are to the actual revenue machine, like there's a lot of sales orgs who will celebrate like a big month and they'll call out the top AEs and this and that. The reality is those AEs got their demos from somewhere. And a lot of these AEs didn't necessarily prospect themselves. And especially in this world, and we're moving more and more towards this sales development, where those meetings did come from the SDRs. So I think it's trying to understand what you need from a revenue target and doing that back math. But I like what Sam's saying about pressure testing different quotas and seeing sort of what the, like what someone's appetite for success truly looks like. Anyway, I just said I don't have much to add, and I just added it.
I want to pull in I love that, Patrick. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, please interrupt me. I was
Question
talking
from the
too long.
chat. Somebody asked a good question. If your whole team is repeatedly missing quota, perhaps it's time to be introspective, or is it time to reinforce training and provide personal attention to reps?
Of course. If your whole team, I think it goes back to what Patrick's saying. You need to do the maths. Is it possible for your team to have hit quota? Is it possible for your team to have hit quota, right? Are you looking at your total addressable market? Are you working backwards from those targets that you've been hitting, your conversion rates, et cetera, et cetera? Yes, it's a leadership function, which is who teaches and trains your SDRs to be great, but it's also a leadership function, which has the holistic approach to go, okay, is this an SDR problem? So is this a training and we need to look introspectively, or are we not setting them up for success because we've plucked a number that we've heard somewhere and it's not fair on them, and we're letting them down? That'd be my two pence or 2 cents.
I've got 3 pence as well. Two for my 2 cents, and then 1 because I like the person asked this question. If your whole team is missing quota right now, there's one tool you'll need, and it's a mirror. If your whole team is missing quota right now, that's not a reflection of your team, that's a reflection of yourself. So go ahead and look in the mirror for a little bit and think for a bit. Or honestly, come talk to me. Come talk to me, Molly, Pat, anyone at Sales Hacker. We'll tell you like how to solve it, because you're just setting your quota wrong if your whole team's missing quota. Full stop. There's no reason why. I mean, like if your whole team's 1 SDR or 1 sales rep, okay, yeah, that's not your whole team missing quota. That's one person missing quota. But if you got a team of 13 SDRs, 16 SDRs, 35, 50, 100, and everyone's missing quota, like, yeah, you grab a mirror, look in it, and then come talk to us.
I think to their point too, like, yeah, it's important to be able to, and sometimes it's hard to like look in the mirror and say like, I'm wrong. You need to be able to do that first of all. But also you have to be able to like look at the data and look like at the workflows and be able to determine what is the actual true like root of the problem. Like what like metric specifically is it struggling, or like, are you struggling specifically? Like some reps may have a very poor, say, connect to demo conversion number. Like, okay, so that means that they're getting people on the phones a lot, but they're struggling to close. So are they open? Or when are they losing the call? Right? Are they losing it in the first 30 seconds? Okay, well maybe they don't have a confident opener. Are they losing it 5 minutes? 5 minutes in, they keep losing meetings. After 5 minutes, they get a hang up. Well, they're probably not asking for the meeting, and they're not probably providing that value. So you have to be able, I agree. I'm with you. Like you have to look inward and be like, oh, something I'm doing is wrong. But that I wake up every morning. I'm like, oh, okay, what did I do wrong today? But like half of the fun of this job is being like, oh, let me diagnose it and fix it. Like, oh, totally. Yeah. Well, like if your people are missing your number, of course it's your problem. Yeah, I like that. That is good. Good question. They're very challenging. Totally. It's on you to look inward and fix it. That's why you were hired. That's part of the job.
Thanks, y'all. So I've got a culture question for you before, and then if we've got time, we could do some maybe like rapid fire questions from the chat. But looking past week 1 or week 2, what pieces are you putting in place for ongoing training? I know that's a really big piece. Do you set up cascading goals or anything, you know, that makes your reps feel like they're doing meaningful work? How are you looking past week 1 and week 2?
I can
go ahead.
I'll take a quick one at this, just because we have a very this is quite a thorough, we have a thorough onboarding program. So we have a program called the 30, 60, 90. And it's essentially at the first 30 days are mapped out, what kind of trainings you can expect, next 60 and up to 90. With this in mind, it's a shared document that you will be sharing with the SDR. Through this, you can kind of track the progress. At any point, if they feel like they had that training, but they don't remember that training, they can rate that training out of 10. Do they feel confident on it? And essentially, it's a really easy way to kind of keep track also as a manager, especially if you're like onboarding loads and loads of classes at different times. It's a really nice way to look at, you know, the first 30 days is going to be your table stakes, how to be an SDR at the company. The next 30 to 60 days is going to be more about, adding bells and whistles, using kind of that omni-channel approach. I'll give Sam a little shout out here. It's when we would start to focus more on bringing in all our little snazzy tools, because we wouldn't do that straight away. So when we start to get our nice snazzy tool stack out, and then 60 to 90 is when you're going to be basically ensuring consistent performance. So I know that is a question that's below that I'd really like us to get to, because I know I'd like us to get to that, Sam, if that's okay, on the fact that not every team will consistently hit, and kind of what Sam and Patrick's take is on that, because I think that'd be quite interesting. But yeah, that sounds great. That's the very structured approach we take at Outreach in terms of the first 90 days. So yeah, that's us.
Anything to add there, Sam or Patrick? Or if we're down, maybe we can take a couple questions in our last couple of minutes.
I think there were plenty of questions that we probably didn't do as good of a job to address. So I have nothing.
Yeah, Molly's right. Listen to Molly. There you go.
Totally.
Yeah. Pay your money. Hire on as a consultant. Grossman services.com, outreach.io, $5,000 an hour. And there you go.
All right. So when you transitioned to an SDR leader, what was your biggest takeaway from the process and from your new role as a leader?
You work for your people, not the other way around. Okay.
Mine was, just because you were a really good IC doesn't mean you're going to be a really good manager. They're completely two different skill sets, and you should see it as such.
The best leaders lead from the back, and not in make everyone do the work, but make sure no one gets left behind.
I love that. Is there such a thing as too many tools, too few or too many tools in the tech stack shed?
Yes.
I mean, you should be constantly looking at like what the return on investment of all of your different pieces of the tech stack, and see like what that adoption looks like and that consumption. And if it's not worth the investment, then you should cut it. You should have a real business case to keep everything.
Yeah, there are literal tools that manage that for you and show you user usage. And like, if you don't have above 50% usage, what the fuck are you spending your money on?
I love that. We got one from Juan Pablo Garcia. How do you create self-value in SDRs whose role is to schedule meetings with their senior reps and are not always subject matter experts in what the company is selling? How do they feel secure in value adding?
Ask them what they wanted to be when they grew up, and then tie their net worth as a human being to the job they do today.
Help them understand that those results and that career aspiration, but also help them feel like they're a bigger part of the revenue puzzle than just meeting setters. That like, I thank my people a lot, like, for their contribution to the revenue model.
Awesome. How do you see the coaching tools being used in the onboarding and keeping an SDR up to speed? Example, Balto.
Yes. They're expensive, but yes.
Yeah, game changer. We use something called WorkRamp. that was actually quite new to my team. Our last onboarding, we used it, and yeah, it was a game changer. Patrick said it best. It saves so much time, and if you're trying to grow out a team effectively, you can't have one person who's really, really good at training. You need to be able to scale that model, and a tool like that's going to help.
It's a reason why professional athletes watch game footage. You could win multiple championships and you still have a lot to learn, and you still are watching game film because the game evolves and there's always room to improve. That was my answer.
Love that. Well, last question and we'll call it a day. Have you ever seen the SDR function specialized? One researcher, one sequencer, one caller?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up here because we're at the hour mark. Thank you so much, Sam, Patrick, Molly. This has been wonderful. If we didn't get to your questions, we're going to collect them all. We'll try to get you some answers, and we'll be sending out the recording to this webinar as well. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you on the next one.